Hello everyone, and welcome to today's AP Definitive Source webinar, Ensuring Accuracy Wins Against Fake News. Let's start out with a little bit of housekeeping before we meet our speakers and dive into the session. First of all, this call is strictly on background for educational, informational purposes. This is not intended for news production or consumption. Everyone is in a listen-only mode, so if you have questions, you can submit them using the chat box that you see on your screen. If your question doesn't get answered today, we will follow up, or you can reach out to your AP representative who invited you to the call. This call is being recorded today on March 8th, 2017, and a recording link will be shared with everyone who registered for the call. So let me introduce you to our speakers. First of all, we'll start in the middle because that's me. My name is Eric Carvin. I am AP's social media editor, and I'm also the News Ethics Chair of the Online News Association. We also have with us Jason White. He's Manager of News Partnerships at Facebook. And we have Brian Caravellano, Vice President of U.S. News here at the Associated Press. And we're going to be talking about fake and false information online. And let me just break down the agenda before we start. Before I kick it over to Brian for the big picture here. Brian's going to offer us the landscape that we find ourselves in right now around fake and false information and what it means for us in the industry. And then after that, I'm going to talk a little bit about AP's approach to the fact crisis and how we handle fact-checking and some of our partnerships. And then we're going to learn from Jason a little more detail about the specific fact-checking initiative that they're pursuing at Facebook. Then we'll talk about how you can help, those of you who are on the call who are in newsrooms around the country. And then we'll go to some questions. Okay, so first of all, I'm going to hand it off to Brian, again, VP of U.S. News here at AP.
Thanks, Eric. Obviously, we all know that powerful people in this country have been indulging in false and dubious statements for almost as long as there's been a country, and that is one of the reasons why we have journalism to begin with. And for nearly as long, the AP has been there to call them out on it. In the past decade or so, this has given rise to a whole genre of journalism, which we now know as fact-checking. And AP FactCheck was really in the vanguard of this movement, along with PolitiFact, FactCheck.org, and some other now pretty well-known brands in this area. Also, it's really important to note that fact-checking doesn't just take place in fact-check stories. We always, across the board, are careful to, when powerful people make false or misleading statements, to put that right in the story. If a newsmaker says something that isn't true or that is doubtful, obviously you want to say right then, this is not true, or has been called into question, not make someone go find another story somewhere else in order to fact check that. But up until fairly recently in general, fact checking has worked mostly like this. A newsmaker says something questionable in a public forum, and then the fact checkers go to work and they weigh in on whether that statement is true or false or somewhere in between. But the 2016 election changed the playing field in a lot of ways. And one of those things was that it gave rise to, or at least drew a lot of attention to, the use of falsehood as a political weapon. And it turns out to work frighteningly well. And when I say that, I'm not necessarily saying that it swung the election one way or another, which we could probably debate for the rest of this call. I'm saying that the deliberate dissemination of false information has now proven to be an effective strategy to sway public opinion, to change the focus of political discourse in the country, to distract people from the things that you don't want them to be paying attention to and draw attention to something else, even if that something else is totally made up. And so for those of us who do this for a living, this is a very sad and scary revelation. I personally started paying a lot more attention to this in the latter months of the presidential campaign. And I have to give a lot of credit to Craig Silverman, a reporter at BuzzFeed, who did a lot of reporting on this and really drew it out as a major theme in the campaign. The really notable and shocking nugget in his reporting was that fake information that had gone viral and been widely shared was often being more widely shared and more widely used than real news on a lot of different platforms. And for me, it was on the train on the way home from Washington after the election when I really started to think about what the AP might be able to do to fight the scourge of so-called fake news. And just as an aside, I'm going to now avoid calling it news because really it's fiction. I buy into that premise. So at the AP, we take very seriously our commitment to impartiality and objectivity. And as the media landscape is increasingly polarized, we've worked really hard here to stay in the middle. And this is a critically important asset when it comes to standing up for the truth. When we make an assertive statement in a story, which we do and will continue to do, we will always accompany it with evidence to justify the statement that we're making. That's something we really strive to do. Do we get it right 100% of the time? No, but that's our policy, and that's basically how we handle that. And then secondly, and just as importantly, the AP has always seen itself as an advocate for all media when it comes to fighting for journalist access and protections. And standing up for facts is standing up for journalism. That's a big part of who we are and what we do. So in November, we expanded the definition of AP fact check to include debunking false information that is proliferating online and in social media. It seemed our goals aligned pretty well with what Facebook wanted to accomplish, which Jason's going to talk about in a little bit, and so we started working together pretty soon after that. But in short, what AP brings to the table in this situation is a long and hard-won reputation as the gold standard for accuracy and ethics in journalism. Facebook gives us access to their information on what's been flagged as fake on their platform and is trending, and that is a great reporting tool for us. We're interested for sure in working with other platforms on this and in continuing to build out our overall fact-checking operation. We should have some more to say on that in the weeks ahead. And I know a lot of you on the call are thinking about and doing this in your own newsrooms, and the AP would very much like to talk to you about that and to support those efforts, including picking up and distributing more widely your fact-check work when that makes sense. One thing we've learned, and I think this is an important point to keep in mind, is that news verification is really labor-intensive and resource-intensive. Reporting out a fake story is in many ways just as difficult and time-consuming as reporting out a real story. And the line between real and fake is very rarely black and white. More often there are falsehoods and truths contained in a single piece of content, and sorting that out is really what takes the most time. But we here think it's worth the commitment of resources. We've had a lot of feedback from members and even people in the general public who appreciate that effort. So now Eric's going to go into more detail about what we're doing and how it works, and most importantly, how you all might be able to help out if you're interested in doing that.
Okay, great. Thank you, Brian. So before I get into the nitty-gritty of how we've reacted to this, just a quote that I dug up when preparing for this. This is AP's first Washington correspondent who started on the job in 1848 when AP was a couple of years old. A guy named Lawrence Gobright in 1862 was testifying before Congress about the censorship of news reports during the Civil War. And some members of Congress wanted to know, why is it that AP stories never got censored by the government and everybody else's did? And this is part of how he explained it. My business is merely to communicate facts. And he went on to talk about, surely in part about avoiding bias and being balanced in his approach, but also talked about sticking only to legitimate news content. And a lot of this notion in many ways was quite new at the time. Back then, newspapers were routinely biased very strongly one way or another. It's just the way that the business was done, and this was an inflection point when that started to change, and we'd like to think that AP had a big role to play in that. So let's talk. I'm going to talk first a little bit about something that Brian talked about, which is that fact-checking takes a lot of different forms. It's not just about debunking false information from completely fabricated stories. It often has to do with really scrutinizing what's said by newsmakers. And I just wanted to show this example here to show that this is something we've been doing for a while. It's been a good decade or so that we've been doing consistent fact-checking work on what newsmakers say. And this is an example of one from 2012. It's a fact check of a speech that Bill Clinton gave at the Democratic National Convention that year that had a lot of assertions in it that people raised questions about. So we went through them one by one, and we broke them down, and we explained what the truth was in each case. We've done a lot of this around debates during campaign seasons, other major speeches. It's not always about politics, though obviously it often is. And so this was generally what fact-checking meant to us for many years. There has been a little bit of an inflection point where we've started to think a little bit differently about the actual fake news stories that are showing up online. And here's an example of one. There have been a number of stories reporting that Ruth Bader Ginsburg was resigning from the Supreme Court. None of them are true. And you're looking at one right here. There was a time not so long ago when if we came across fake content online, not a quote from a newsmaker, just a completely fabricated story, our usual approach would be to ignore it. Not out of a sense that it wasn't important, but it was more that we were concerned that if we gave it any attention, we were just going to be amplifying the lie and spreading this bad information further by commenting on it. We're in a different place now where because of the proliferation of social networks and just because of access to the web more generally, fake content doesn't need our help to be spread far and wide. Thousands, hundreds of thousands, even millions of people can see a false story just because somebody is clever about how they create it and where they post it and how they disseminate it. So us coming in and weighing in on these stories is not really doing damage anymore. And so we've turned a corner where we've realized that we can actually provide a service by trying to knock these things down and writing our own stories that explain what is incorrect in these stories and that go through the actual truth and the real facts. So we've started doing that more. There was a moment just a little while after the election. I know Brian had been thinking about this already for some time, when he sent a note out around to all different corners around AP reminding them of how important this is and saying, look, there are fake stories popping up everywhere all around the globe. It's part of our mission to look for the most important examples of these, the ones that are resonating with people and that are patently false or that are very misleading, and to knock them down. This is part of what we should do as a fact-based news organization. He also very importantly said that this is something that people need to feel a sense of ownership around whatever desk they might work on. This isn't something that's going to come from HQ every now and then that we need to knock down a story. It needs to just be part of the process of reporting the news. And as Brian said, whenever possible, we need to make sure that it's integrated into our regular stories in addition to looking for opportunities to do separate takedowns of those items. So that's been a real focus since then. And as you can see right here, we're trying to think of different ways to make sure that this content is getting in front of people so that they understand that we are doing this important work and so they have an opportunity to see the truth behind these stories. And what you're looking at here is the AP FactCheck Hub on the AP News website. That's the website, that's apnews.com. And the hub it's sort of a term we use for a section of the site. And everything you'll see here are fact checks by AP. It's a combination of us debunking fake news stories and us fact-checking statements by newsmakers. So it's all contained in this spot. We want to make it easier for the public to find. We want to make it easier for our customers to find it as well. And you can see there's a URL on the top, a shortcut to get to it, apne.ws/factcheck. And you can go there anytime and see our latest ones. In addition, we're trying to find more opportunities to work with groups outside the AP that are focusing on fact-checking and on debunking bad content. One example is the First Draft Coalition, which AP joined late last year. First Draft is an organization that has brought together a number of news outlets from around the world. It's very much a global organization, in addition to several technology companies that have a role to play in this, Facebook being among them, and we'll hear from Jason as well soon. And this is a group that gets together to discuss solutions to this problem, everything from improving news literacy and education for journalists themselves to providing tools to be able to better verify content. The grouping was originally put together just to look at the quality and accuracy of content online generally. But there's been such a focus on fake news stories that it's really given a lot of attention to that. What you see on the screen here is a tool that just came out in the last week or so that's created by First Draft with the Google News Lab called FactCheck. Right now it's focusing, I think, entirely just on the French election campaign as a starting point. They have a number of partners who are labeling content as either true or false, and members of the public, as you can see on the top right where it says submit your own question, members of the public have an opportunity to put in their own questions or to submit their own stories to be examined by this group. So this is a collaborative effort involving news organizations and technology platforms to try to get to the bottom of these stories. And of course, we're working with Facebook on this. Jason from Facebook will talk about this in a little more detail. But in short, we are one of a number of partners who agreed to work with Facebook to look at stories that are being flagged as containing false information and make a decision about whether or not we think those stories are accurate, and do our own debunking stories. As Brian noted earlier, this has a big benefit to us, and I think to all of AP's customers, and that we're getting an earlier heads up about fake stories that are starting to get some traction online, because obviously Facebook is one of the primary places where that would take place. We're able to react more quickly, do our debunking stories more quickly, and then expose those stories to the Facebook audience. So I'm not going to go into too much more detail about that because Jason can explain it more. So let me hand it off to Jason White then, and he can talk about what Facebook is doing with the news industry on this important topic. Jason?
Hey, Eric, thank you so much. And thank you to you and Brian for that overview of the AP's history of fact-checking and a little bit about the fake news ecosystem and how things have changed over the years. I thought that was really informative and helpful. Thanks also to the Associated Press for coming along on this journey with us. Our fact-checking initiative through our platform is relatively new. We've just been doing it for a few months now. It's still very much a beta product. We're working out the kinks, but we're doing so in partnership with organizations like the Associated Press to try to make the ecosystem better for everyone. So as you can see from the slide, my name is Jason White. I manage Facebook's partnership work with news organizations here in the US. I've been working for Facebook for about 4 years, but I actually joined the platform from the news industry. I was a journalist for 12 years before I started at Facebook. Got my start at the New Haven Register as a print reporter, and then went on to work for CNN as a producer, and then NBC News on the digital side on their news desk. So been in the news business for a long time, and I was really excited to come over to Facebook to help news organizations better leverage the platform. And what that means has actually changed a lot over the years that I've been here. When I first joined Facebook, there was no video on the platform. It was relatively simple. News organizations like the AP, like the organizations you're all a part of, you'd post a preview of a story on Facebook, you'd get referral traffic back to your website. And you still do that, and you do a lot of that. But since then, we have come out with a video product. There's now live video on the platform, which many of you are probably using. Instant articles. Some of you might even be playing around with virtual reality, which is a much more futuristic way to tell news stories. So my team works with news organizations across all of these products, and we help you guys leverage the platform. And one of the areas that we've gotten involved in recently was our fake news initiative, and that's how we started working really deeply with Eric and the broader organization on this sort of thing. So before I get into exactly what that product is, I want to talk a little bit about the Facebook Journalism Project. Facebook's role in the news ecosystem has changed a lot, as many of you probably know. And we wanted to put down a public marker that just sort of said, like, look, we want to collaborate even more deeply with the industry. We know that you have a lot of questions you'd like to see answered. You have feedback on our products. And while we've always been engaged in a dialogue with the industry, we want to be much more intentional and much more public about it. And even our participation in a webinar like this is a part of this initiative where we want to make sure that you guys are informed about what we're doing. You can better align your strategy with where we're going, and also offer feedback on that so we can pivot and change course if we're doing things that news organizations are finding not beneficial over time. So when we put out the Facebook Journalism Project, the announcement actually came out under the name of Fiji Simo. She's our Director of Product at Facebook. And I think it's really important that this was under her name and that she was standing behind this, because it says that this is not just a PR initiative, right? This is something where product is core to Facebook, core to our identity as a company. And so this is our product organization getting behind this and saying that we care deeply about working with the ecosystem so that it can be healthy and so that journalism can thrive. So there's a few main parts to the Facebook Journalism Project, and the Fake News Initiative is part of the third pillar. I'm going to quickly walk through the first two, which involve collaboration around news products and then training and tools for journalists. So the product collaboration piece, this is a super important one. We are, as I noted, a product-driven company. We are an engineering-driven company. All of the organizations represented on this call, you guys use our platform in a variety of ways to reach your audience. But at the end of the day, what you're using are our products. You're using Newsfeed. You're using Facebook pages. You might be using Facebook groups to more deeply engage around a single subject. You might be posting video to tell a story. A reporter of yours from the field might be going live. So we are looking for ways to better collaborate with you around all of these products and also better understand the value that you are or are not getting from them. So a deep commitment to driving more value for publishers is a core part of the first pillar of the Facebook Journalism Project. I think innovation is an important part as well. I mentioned earlier 360 and virtual reality. I would put Messenger in this bucket as well, where these are brand new areas of technology where the business value is not entirely clear, but we do see some organizations working with these products, and we're here to help you guys optimize your work and to also help these products develop in a way where they are more productive and effective for you over time. So the second pillar of the Facebook Journalism Project is around education for journalists. You know, one of the most common questions we get when we visit newsrooms, when we talk to news executives is, how can my journalists better leverage this platform? We know there's a lot of people using the platform, but how can we better tap into the stories that they might be sharing with each other in our community? How can we engage them around something like the repeal of Obamacare, as we want to try to understand what this means for them? So the training and the tools for journalists is really set up to help answer those kinds of questions. We have some e-learning courses available online. We're increasingly doing newsroom visits. We're also doing some local news events. Some of you may have seen we were in Dallas and Atlanta recently. We're going to be in Seattle and San Diego at the end of this month. So if you guys have any interest in that, feel free to reach out to Eric or your AP sales rep, and we'll try to figure out how to get the invite to you guys to make sure you can attend. Another thing that we've heard from publishers very, very frequently is that they want to better understand their performance on our platform and better understand their competitors as well and what they could be doing to better optimize for newsfeed and for engaging and delivering content to their audience on Facebook. CrowdTangle is one of the most commonly cited tools when we talk to publishers about how they understand their performance on Facebook. So we actually purchased CrowdTangle recently and brought that team into Facebook and made CrowdTangle a free tool. We want to make sure that there is no journalist and no news organization anywhere that can't get those basic questions answered. Like, CrowdTangle is a great way to understand, you know, is this strategy working for me? What's working for my competitors? And so how might I be able to pivot over time to grow my presence on the platform? So making CrowdTangle free is an important pillar of this, the second facet of the Facebook Journalism Project. So the third one is really the heart of what I wanted to talk about today with you guys and the heart of our work with the Associated Press. So, you know, Brian mentioned in the beginning kind of the rise of fake news and misinformation. And I think one of the things we've seen in our platform that might be a little different than what Brian noted is that it's less about ideology and more about, we think, economic incentives. And that seems to be what's driving a lot of the fake news that we see out there, at least as it relates to our platform. We have seen examples where there was someone who was posting fake news about Hillary Clinton, just making up these stories, hoping they would go viral. People would share them with their friends. People would click on them and then see a bunch of ads when they go back to the website. This guy found out that there wasn't the best return for his investment in fake news stories about Clinton, so he pivoted and started creating fake news stories about Trump. And he found that to be a little bit more of fertile territory. And I think the same goes for a lot of the stories you've seen about the so-called Macedonian teenagers who are creating fake news and trying to get it to spread on a variety of social platforms. So, there's a few ways that we're trying to attack this problem. One part is certainly economics. Another part is trying to create more informed news consumers. This is an industry-wide challenge, and we think as consumers use any social platform or any other platform, we think there's a lot of value in trying to help them do so as more informed distributors of content, because in many cases, the audience has become the distributor. And so we think it's really important to reach out to those audiences and help them become better informed about the quality of the content that they're sharing, the name of the producer that has created that content, and what's their history, and how much can they be trusted. So there's a lot of interesting work to be done there. I'm going to move into a few more specifics here around fact-checking and around this work on misinformation. So, Eric talked a little bit about the Associated Press's work with the fact-checking product on our platform. So this is something that we started testing with the AP and a few other partners, among them PolitiFact, Snopes, FactCheck.org, and ABC News back in December. And there's a few parts to this product. The first part is consumer-facing. So any person on Facebook now, we rolled this out first in the US and we're working on some international country rollouts, can now flag a story as fake news. So there's a little, we call it a chevron, but there's a little button in the upper right of most of the stories you'll see on Facebook, and you can report the story as a variety of things. You can say, this is spam, I don't want to see this content. You can tell us why you don't want to see this content. It's a fake news story has now become one of the clear and explicit categories that users can use to flag this content. This is really important because every month there's nearly 1.9 billion people who use the Facebook platform, many of them to read and share news with their friends and family. And so empowering that community to be an early warning signal on fake news is one of the most powerful levers that we have as a company to combat this problem. So rolling this out was a key part of our work here. And as you can see, when someone clicks it's a fake news story, they get a few options. They can just say this is fake news, and I'll tell you what happens from there. They can message their friend that shared this with them. Also, if this friend is consistently sharing fake news and they're tired of seeing these stories from this friend, they can also block content from this person. So that is another step that someone can take. So once users flag a story as fake news, we get a lot of these reports every day. We're now surfacing them in a dashboard that the Associated Press and the other early partners for this product have access to. And it gives them a sense of the kind of content that users are saying that believe are fake or false or hoax news stories, and also the virality of that content. So we're trying to surface things that have a little bit of traction on our platform to keep the signal high so that the Associated Press doesn't have to wade through hundreds or 1,000 reports a day. We're also going after the worst of the worst purveyors of fake news. This is not about trying to, parse out whether, a story from the Washington Post was 100% accurate or if they may have gotten a quote wrong or something like that. That is not our goal here. It's also not our goal to fact-check politicians. That work already goes on every single day in every single newsroom across the U.S. and across the world. Those stories are posted en masse on our platform. There's an amazing dialogue that goes on every single day around the truth and falsehood of statements coming from politicians, and leaders. And so that's a really important exchange of information that has always taken place on our platform and always will, and those are really great debates that can play out. But what we're going after are those stories that are just purely made up, the stories like the one you saw earlier highlighted by Eric, like the Pope has endorsed Donald Trump, that kind of story. We want to make sure that consumers are informed that this story that they might be consuming or this story they might be sharing is a fake news story. And so the Associated Press has access to this dashboard, and if they have looked into one of the stories in there, or they decide to look into one of those stories and determine that it's false, they can rate that story as false. And a badge will show up in Newsfeed wherever this story appears. And as you can see this right here. It says disputed by third-party fact checkers, and then we link out to those fact checkers and their actual dispute of the story, so that the reader can get more information about this. The goal here is to create more informed consumers. So we're not going to stop someone from reading the story, but we do want to make them more informed about the story that they're interested in reading. And the same goes for sharing. Sharing is the key to distribution on our platform. And it's when users pass stories on to their friends and family, and then those friends and family keep passing that story on to their friends and family. That's how stories take off on our platform. And there's a lot of amazing content that gets passed around that way and a lot of incredible news content. But occasionally people will pass around fake news stories as well. Some people probably do it as a joke. They might think the story is funny. They might leave a little ha-ha on it as they share it. But some people probably do it in the mistaken view that the story is true. And so we want to make sure that for those stories that have been flagged by our fact-checking partners, that users actually get this little interstitial warning that tells them, hey, this story has been disputed. Now, they can go on and share that story if they want. We're not going to stop that. But we do want to make sure they're doing so in full awareness of what the fact-checking community has to say about this story. So another key pillar of our work around fake and false news I mentioned earlier is what we're calling news literacy. This work is early, and there isn't a specific product initiative targeted toward news literacy. We think here the real opportunity is around collaborating with the industry. So collaborating with groups like First Draft, which you heard Eric talk about before, collaborating with Google and other platforms, and collaborating with news organizations around the world to try to create more informed news consumers. This past weekend, we actually put on a small conference at the Walter Cronkite School of Journalism and Mass Communication at Arizona State University. We gathered 50 of the leading experts in this topic from around the world. I can't talk about exactly what was said at that conference, but I can tell you that some work streams coming out of that are going to be some more regional meetings, because we think that internationally there's more dialogue to be had. We're also thinking about some research topics where we can help experts dig in even deeper to get more of an understanding of what precisely are the problems we're trying to solve for here, and then coming out of that, what might be some good solutions. Should we launch a PSA campaign in partnership with the industry, that sort of thing. So those are some of the things that we're thinking about when it comes to news literacy. And then finally, I want to talk a little bit about our work around disrupting the economics. I mentioned at the beginning that, in our view, a lot of what we've seen are financially motivated actors as opposed to propagandists. And so there's a few different levers that we can pull here when it comes to trying to disrupt the economics of this. Because if we disrupt the economics, it's no longer a viable industry. So the first part is making sure that the creators of fake and false news are not using Facebook advertising back on their own websites. So we have an ad network called the Facebook Audience Network, and some very legitimate news organizations, probably some of those represented on the call, actually use that as a programmatic source of advertising back on your websites. We have an initiative underway to make sure that this is not being used on fake news websites. We also have an initiative underway to make sure that these organizations are not essentially paying to distribute their content on Facebook. As you know, Newsfeed is the primary way that content travels on Facebook. within there, the best way to get a lot of distribution is to have a lot of people sharing your content. Some organizations will also actually buy ads for their content to distribute it, and we have found instances where fake and false purveyors of fake and false news are doing this. And so this is another area where we can very proactively go in and stop repeat offenders from buying ads on behalf of their content just to try to get traffic back to their websites. So I want to talk about a few resources where you can go deeper on some of this stuff, or if you're just interested in getting updates on what we're doing on this front in the future. The first is we've launched a public Facebook page for the Facebook Journalism Project. So if you just type in Facebook Journalism Project in your search bar, you can like and follow that page just to get updates on kind of what we're doing on all of the pillars of the Facebook Journalism Project that I laid out here. We also have a private group for industry members, about 9,000 members globally now, called the News Media and Publishing Group. This is good for folks who are really hands-on with the Facebook product. So if you're like a social media manager or a digital director and you have questions about our products, you want to know what your peers are doing, you want to hear about, smaller product updates that may not rise to the level of a broad Facebook Journalism Project update, the group is a great place to join for some of that information. And we also have a lot of resources collected at this shorthand URL. It's fb.me/FJP resources, and that stands for Facebook Journalism Project Resources. There you'll see a whole bunch of things from the Facebook group I just talked about to the blueprint courses for journalism training and so on. So thanks all for taking the time today. I really appreciate it, and I think we're going to turn to some questions in a few minutes.
Thank you, Jason. Before we move to questions, there's one last point I wanted to make here as you look at this slide that some of you may have seen before, and that is Brian alluded to this before, but we think there's really a really amazing opportunity for those of you who are on the call and anybody who's at any news outlet to help take up the cause to try to work against this unfortunate trend of false information that's spreading online. We feel that, first of all, there are a number of stories that you're going to know about well before we would, and that are going to be important in your communities that we might not be in a position or might not have the expertise to debunk ourselves. So there's a service that you could be providing within your own markets and within your own local areas. And in addition, I feel like one advantage that a lot of you have over a really huge global news organization is that you have an ability to establish a level of trust with your local community. That's a lot more difficult for us, frankly, and that makes it that increases the opportunity to do this work effectively. In case you're wondering what's on the screen, this is an example of just what I'm talking about. This was a tweet. Forgive this for being a little bit fuzzy. This is the screenshot that survived from a tweet that has been deleted. This is a tweet that was sent by somebody in Austin, Texas, who took some pictures of some buses. This is right after the election. And you can see, he says, anti-Trump protesters in Austin today are not as organic as they seem. Here are the buses they came in. This was part of sort of a trend at the time, and something you hear from time to time, that protesters are actually being paid and bussed in by pick your billionaire of choice who might be funding this sort of activity. In the case of this one, this is just a person on the street who saw some buses and took the pictures, and he actually didn't know anything about what these buses were. He jumped to a conclusion. He explained later on, I looked around and I didn't hear about any conferences being in town, which seems unlikely to ever be the case in Austin to me. But in reality, it turns out that that's what these buses were transporting people for a conference from a convention center to some kind of off-site event. And so what he tweeted here was incorrect. And the problem was that an awful lot of people believed it was real, and then some news outlets, maybe news is in quotes in some of these cases, but a number of outlets picked it up and reported this as evidence that there were paid protesters showing up. This is the kind of story that I think is important for people to get the truth on very quickly. And if this happens in your territory, you'll be very well positioned to do that. And in this case, it was the Austin American-Statesman that did that quick work to get this story right. Okay, so let's go ahead and move to questions. I'll say, as I did before, that you're still on mute here. If you have questions, you can type them into the chat field that you should see on your screen. We've had a couple that have come in already, so I'll go ahead and ask them. Both of these are mostly questions for Jason over at Facebook. So let's start with this one. Does Facebook note media outlets such as AP members or members of newspaper associations as trusted sources of news? As the questioner notes, that would automatically tell readers that the news, the story that they're reading is from a trusted source. So, we already talked about there being a select number of organizations involved in this fact-checking partnership. Is there anything else you can say, Jason, about sort of noting what trusted sources are?
Yeah, it's a fascinating question, and just certainly a pertinent one given the conversation we're having today. I think at the end of the day, our approach to this is to rely on our community, and rather than trying to be the arbiters of truth ourselves. The goal of Newsfeed is to connect people with the stories they find most meaningful, and certainly our community has made it clear that they want authentic stories and not fake ones. We regularly survey our users and ask them what they're interested in, and being informed and informative content is a key pillar of that. It's something they tell us again and again and again that they want out of Facebook. So we've actually been working for years to reduce the spread of fake news, of clickbait, of spammy content. It's one of the reasons we've seen legitimate news organizations actually perform really well on our platform over time, and we've seen their audiences grow. So we've made some progress, but we clearly have some more work to do on these issues. And this stuff is really complicated, right? And we need to be very careful about how we do this kind of thing. We work in pretty much every country around the world with varying standards, varying news communities, news producers span the spectrum. And so, again, we don't feel like it's our job to necessarily say, this organization is good, this organization is bad, but we do want to create tools that lead to more informed consumers and help you guys connect with the audience that is really excited and interested to receive content from you.
Great, thanks, Jason. Before I get to the next question, a couple of people have said they were having trouble opening the URL that we shared before, linking to the FactCheck Hub. Let me give you the full URL for that, which is not actually terribly long anyway. It's apnews.com/tag/APFactCheck, all as one word. So if you want to try to go there, hopefully you can find that link. Okay, another question that came in for Jason is, this is a pretty straightforward one and sounds important to me. How do we get access to CrowdTangle?
So, yeah, that's actually a pretty straightforward one. If you go to the CrowdTangle website, which I believe is just crowdtangle.com, you can actually just request access right there. We have the CrowdTangle team and operations team just working through these requests. I can tell you there have been a lot of them, so you may not get that access right away, but they will definitely get to you at some point. The early onboarding, it's nice to do it in dialogue with the CrowdTangle team a little bit to make sure it's set up in a way where you're getting the most out of it, and that's why it's not just something where, we turn it on and you're off to the races. So it may take a little while for you to actually get that access, but that is the right way to do it, and we'll make sure you get it eventually.
Okay, great. Thank you, Jason. Here's a question that is more for us at AP. Is AP planning any kind of daily widget for online or a piece for print, rounding up that day's fact checks? Well, first of all, there's the hub that we showed you. That's, I realize, more of a consumer-facing thing, but we're looking into some ways to label our fact checks distinctly and offer more of a feed around them. Brian, do you have anything that you want to add about that?
Yeah, what we're doing now is we're taking the week's fact checks and rounding them up once a week. I think as we build this out and do it more and more, we might move to a daily roundup like that. But one interesting thing is that we frequently see that usage among both members and on our own platform shows that weekly roundup is often the most popular item of the week or one of the most popular items of the week. So clearly there's a lot of interest in continuing to package those together. And so if we start to do it often enough to warrant doing it every day, I think we would move to that. But right now we're doing that weekly.
And that raises a really good point. I mean, we're obviously talking about fighting the good fight here, but I mean, to be honest, as we do more and more of these fact checks, we're learning that this is very popular content.
Yeah.
These are stories that people want to click on. People crave the facts. They crave the truth. As Brian said, there have been some weeks where our weekly roundup of our fact checks from the week is our most popular item of the week. It is really that popular. So I think that's a pretty big deal, and there's no reason that wouldn't be the case for you if you did your own fact checks. I can imagine too. Jason, let me ask another question about the Fact Check initiative. Can you talk a little bit about how things are going so far, and how many stories have been flagged so far in the U.S. part of this initiative?
Yeah, it's still really early yet. We're not putting any numbers out there. We appreciate the work that the AP has been putting into this and our other partners. And so for us, it's really about trying to take some of these early learnings in dialogue with the Associated Press and others and figure out how we can improve the product and where we can go from here. So we've already made some small changes to the tool based on feedback from Eric and from PolitiFact and other folks. We're looking at international expansion. So we've announced in France that we're going to be doing this there. So, those are some of the kinds of things we're looking at, but we don't have any numbers to put out at this time.
Okay. And another question sort of related to the initiative. Can you, let's say that a piece of content gets disputed by the organizations involved in the initiative, and then the creator of that content feels that that's wrong. Is there a way to appeal this decision or a way to undo it? How can a publisher react to that situation?
Yeah, that's a great question. So the fact check that the Associated Press does or that PolitiFact does actually lives on a website that is not Facebook, right? Like a user can click back to ap.org or can click to PolitiFact and actually read that fact check right there. So in many ways, it's not different than any other time that you guys might be fact checking a fake news story. And so we actually want the dialogue to take place between the creator of that content and the organizations that are doing the fact checking. So that's actually where the dialogue would take place, and it wouldn't be different than any other time that, say, you or PolitiFact were to fact check a given story. So yes, we take some of that information and bring it into the Facebook platform, but ultimately it's between you and that organization as to whether this fact check is accurate or not.
Okay, and just as a reminder to everyone, if you have additional questions, feel free to type them into the chat field in the corner of your screen. Jason, so I've heard from some people, and I've noticed this myself, that you don't really see a lot of these, disputed by X items on Facebook. That the stories that get flagged this way seems like they don't really turn up all that much anymore. Can you talk about how things change algorithmically when one of the participants in this initiative flags something as false?
Sure. Yeah. So when we put a badge on a story in Newsfeed that says disputed by, and when we have that interstitial pop up when someone is sharing it, it decreases engagement on that story, and so that means over time fewer people are going to see it because fewer people are going to share it with their friends. So it has the effect of reducing distribution. We also take that fact check into our ranking system for Newsfeed as a signal, and so it also weighs into how many people we would show this to if the story does get shared. So in effect, the great work that the fact-checking organizations do has the impact of reducing distribution for that given piece of content. And I think a more general note is important too, is that there actually isn't that much fake and false news that we've been able to find in our analysis. There's certainly some stories that have gone viral, and again, that happens for a variety of reasons. People might find them funny, they may just want to share it with their friends as kind of a joke. And so as a percentage of the overall volume, it's very, very, very low. And so unless your friends and family are sharing this stuff with you, or unless you actually follow fake news organizations on Facebook, you're just not going to see it, or you're not going to see very much of it. I personally have never seen a fake news story in my newsfeed that I'm aware of because my friends and family don't share that stuff. And I follow legitimate news organizations like the Associated Press and New York Times and many, many others. So, a lot of what you will see in your newsfeed, or actually everything you'll see in your newsfeed, is a function of who you are connected to on the platform. So that is probably why you guys would not really see this badge very often, because at the end of the day, there isn't that much of this, and the badge is really just going on the worst of the worst content that's getting surfaced to these fact-checking organizations.
Okay, here's a question that came in, Jason. So obviously part of what's happened during this initiative is it's become easier for users to flag content as fake. We've got somebody who wrote in saying that she doesn't see that function. Is that available to all users, the ability to flag something as suspicious? And if not, is it something that's still rolling out? Is it just because it's in beta? Can you talk about that for a second?
That's a good question. My understanding is that it would show up on all, make sure it's a URL piece of content so that it's actual like a story and not a video or a photo or just a text post. We're really going after those domains that are trying to make money on this stuff, and the main way they make money is getting traffic back to their websites. So I would just say just double check that. But my understanding was that it had rolled out in the US, so there might just be a buggy thing there, or perhaps, we sometimes keep small holdout groups as we test products, just to see what engagement looks like, just to make sure that this thing is actually effective and working. So, yeah, let's take that as a follow-up, Eric. If this person could actually reach out to you or someone else at AP, I just want to make sure that it's all working as it should be.
Sure, we can definitely do that, Jason. So here's another question about how do you battle the claims of bias that pop up when we're doing legitimate fact checking? I think this is a good question for Brian when people react that way to our fact checks.
I mean, I guess the question is how do we battle it, and the answer is we don't really battle it. We just do what we do. We do fact-based journalism. We work really, really hard here to keep bias out of our reporting. Occasionally, word choice leads to for people to draw conclusions from stories, and so we think really hard about the words that we use because often those claims are centered around word choice, particularly in headlines and leads, as opposed to the content of the piece. And so that's really important to think about. But the answer is that we stay the course and we do what the AP has always done, and we rest on facts, and when we make statements we support those with evidence and facts to back up the assertions that we're making.
Yeah, and there's a real challenge around that, and it's so important to stay that course, and probably an important thing for everyone on this call to think about because of the fact that we've been labeled the enemy of the people. There's a lot of the public has a fairly negative viewpoint of the media, as has been the case for many, many years, which makes it more challenging to do this work. But yeah, keeping an eye on the ball seems really critical.
It's also, for us, it's really important to not get drawn into the fray too much and to try and stay above that. And certainly there are occasions where we make mistakes, including, I can't think of a specific example in a fact check, but if we do, we correct or clarify those mistakes immediately, as is our policy with all content.
Jason, you'll be glad to know that our person who had trouble finding that function has now located it. It looks like she was looking at a video instead of something linking to a story, but now she's able to. I hope she's not actually finding fake content, but she's able to flag it. So that's good. That's good to hear.
That's great. Yeah, and it is one level in. So you click the upper right, and it says report this post, and then under there you should have it's a fake news story as one of the options. So yeah, hopefully everyone is seeing that. It has. We confirmed while you were answering that last question, and it has rolled out to everyone in the U.S.
Okay, great. There's another question here. Conversely, on flagging the fake stories, how do you combat against false flags? So I guess when people are falsely flagging something as fake because of some kind of a political agenda, perhaps. I mean, what I would say about that is that's sort of part of the point of how Facebook has structured this initiative, is that an ordinary member of the public can't cause a piece of content to disappear from Facebook by simply flagging it as fake. It's going through a layer of expertise that's got to taking an unbiased and careful approach to the facts.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I would say that's exactly right. We wanted to add that layer of review, and we knew that it was news organizations and fact-checking organizations that were best positioned to actually be the ones doing that kind of review. And so that's why we set up the product the way we did and established the initial partnerships the way we did.
Okay, great. All right, well, it's just about time for us to wrap up now. So I'll just remind you that if you have any questions that we weren't able to get to during this call, please feel free to reach out to your AP rep, and you can get that question to us, and we'll see what we can do about answering it. Also, as mentioned before, this session is being recorded, and the recording will be sent out to those who signed up, so you can share it with others in your newsroom if that would be useful. So I hope this was interesting and helpful to you, and I hope you have a great day. Thanks very much for joining us.